Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to try to tackle AI bias in those enterprise systems, the ones that businesses use. It's a topic that's probably way more relevant to your life than you might think.
Oh, absolutely.
We're using the AI bias blind spots report from Cognition.Info to kind of guide us along.
That choice.
This report doesn't just, like, lay out the risks, but it gives some really interesting solutions for, companies that are actually developing and using AI. And, this isn't some far-off problem like we always talk about. AI is already making decisions that affect you, like, right now,
Right now.
from loan approvals to healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, what's really striking about this report is how it moves beyond just like theoretical harm and really gets into those real world impacts of bias. Like it highlights a case where a major financial institution had to pay almost $250 million
Wow.
to settle a lawsuit because their loan approval system was discriminating against applicants from certain neighborhoods. So that's not just bad ethics, right? It's a
No.
huge hit to the bottom line.
250 million.
It's a
That's
lot of money.
okay. So it's clear that bias can cost companies a lot of money.
Yeah.
But what about the human cost?
Yeah.
The report talks about some pretty disturbing examples.
Absolutely. One that really stands out is the case of a healthcare AI system. It was recommending different treatment plans for patients based on their race, even when their medical conditions were like identical.
Oh, wow.
So, that kind of bias can actually be like a matter of life and death.
It's kind of scary to think about these systems already being used in such, like, important situations, high-stakes situations.
Hmm.
But where does this bias even, like, come from?
Yeah.
Is it, like, intentionally programmed into the AI?
It's rarely that straightforward. The report kind of points to three main sources of bias: the data itself, the development process, and the organizational culture surrounding AI. Let's start with the data. If the data used to train an AI system reflects historical biases, well, the AI is going to learn those biases.
So it's like kind of like teaching a kid bad habits.
It-
They're going to pick them up from their surroundings.
Exactly.
Okay. But what about the development process? Can't we just, like, program the AI to be fair?
It's not that easy. It's not as simple as writing a few lines of code. Even the people who are designing and building these systems can, unknowingly introduce their own biases.
Unconsciously, yeah.
Yeah. For example, if a development team is made up of mostly people from a certain background, they might not realize that their system is biased against people from other backgrounds.
So even with the best intentions, bias can still, like, creep in.
It can.
It's almost like a design flaw that's just, like, hard to spot.
Absolutely. And then there's the organizational culture piece, right?
Right.
The report talks about how a company's structure and incentives can actually make the bias worse.
Interesting.
For example, if a company really puts like a priority on speed and efficiency above everything else, they might be more likely to overlook potential bias, especially if it means getting a product to market quicker.
Yeah, it's like cutting corners, but the corner you're cutting is fairness.
Exactly.
Knowing all of this, it feels like tackling AI bias is a pretty massive, like, undertaking. Is there even, like, a starting point?
Yeah, the good news is that the report actually provides a pretty comprehensive framework for addressing this AI bias.
Okay.
And it starts with building a culture of fairness within the organization, which, sounds pretty big.
Yeah.
But that means having really clear policies, dedicated resources, and strong leadership commitment to addressing this bias. Think of it kind of like building a house. You need a really solid foundation, right?
Yeah.
Before you start adding the walls and the roof.
Okay, so it's not just about tweaking the algorithm. It's about, like, a much bigger change in how companies, like, think about AI in general.
Exactly.
Okay. But what about the technical side of things? Are there, like, specific tools or techniques that companies can use to help with this?
Absolutely. The report gets into a whole range of different technical approaches, like carefully selecting your training data and using algorithms that are designed to promote fairness. One that I find really interesting is something called causal analysis.
Causal analysis.
It's a way of going beyond those surface level patterns to really understand the underlying causes of the bias. Think of like detective work, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to find the root cause of a problem instead of just treating the symptoms.
So it's about asking why something is happening, not just what's happening.
Exactly.
Okay. But it sounds like it takes a village to, like, tackle this AI bias, right?
It does.
It can't just be one person's responsibility.
Absolutely. And the report stresses the importance of having a diverse team.
Makes sense.
Different perspectives can help to spot, potential bias that might be missed by like a more homogenous group. Imagine, for example, a team that's working on a facial recognition system.
Okay.
If everyone on that team has very similar facial features, they might not realize that the system is less accurate for people with different features.
It's like the saying, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
Having a variety of viewpoints can help you see those, like, blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you be sure that these diverse teams are actually, like, being heard?
Yeah.
Isn't there a risk that their concerns will just be, like, dismissed?
That's where leadership really comes in, right? Creating a culture where everyone feels comfortable speaking up and challenging that potential bias is essential,
Yeah.
even if it means, questioning those in charge. And the report emphasizes that point. It's not enough to just hire a diverse team. You have to create an environment where those voices are valued.
So you need, like, a company culture that encourages people to speak up, to challenge the status quo.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a big shift for a lot of organizations.
It is. It is. But the report makes a really compelling case for why that's necessary. And it doesn't just talk theory. It features some real-world examples of companies, big and small, that are successfully tackling AI bias. One case study that really stood out involved a global retail company.
Wait, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Retail seems like an area where AI could have a huge impact.
Yeah.
Huge.
But also, like, where bias could easily creep in.
Exactly. This company was using AI to personalize product recommendations for, their online shoppers.
Yeah.
But they realized that their system was kind of unintentionally steering certain customer demographics towards lower-priced items,
Real.
even when those customers had said they were interested in higher-priced goods.
So the AI was basically, like, limiting people's choices based on, like, assumptions?
Yeah, you could say that.
How did they even catch that? And what did they do about it?
They actually discovered it during routine fairness testing, which the report, recommends.
Okay.
They built a system to regularly analyze their AI's recommendations for any disparities across different groups, different demographics.
Yeah.
And once they kind of discovered that problem, they, took action pretty quickly.
Okay.
They retrained their AI model, used a more diverse data set, and implemented new fairness metrics to make sure it wouldn't happen again. And what's interesting is that after they fixed that bias, they actually saw an increase in customer satisfaction.
Oh, wow.
And sales.
So it's good for business, too.
It is good for business.
That's a great example of how addressing bias can be, good for business and not just ethically the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like the report offers, like, a roadmap, but there's obviously still a lot of work to do.
Lots.
What about the future of this whole, like, fair AI landscape?
That's where things get really fascinating. The report dives into some emerging trends that are shaping the future of fair AI, and I think you'll find some of them pretty surprising.
Oh, I'm all ears. What kind of trends are we talking about?
Well, one of the biggest ones is the evolution of regulations. Get ready for stricter rules around this AI fairness.
Oh, yeah.
Governments around the world are starting to catch on to the potential risks, and companies will soon need to prove that their systems aren't discriminatory.
So it's not just ethical considerations anymore. It's becoming like a legal requirement. It is. It is. And the report predicts we'll see more kind of industry-specific regulations with different standards for different areas like finance, healthcare, hiring. It's kind of like how different industries have safety regulations tailored to their specific risks.
Yeah, that makes sense. A one-size-fits-all approach probably wouldn't work very well with something as complex as AI.
No, probably not.
But what about the actual technology itself? Are there any, like, new developments on the horizon that could help with fairness?
Definitely. One really promising area is that causal analysis we talked about.
Right.
It goes beyond surface-level patterns to understand the root causes of bias. Imagine an AI that can actually help us uncover why bias exists and suggest ways to fix it.
Oh, that sounds like a game changer.
It is exciting.
Instead of just slapping a Band-Aid on the problem,
Right.
we could actually get to the heart of it.
Get to the heart of it. And the report doesn't stop there. It highlights some other, like, really mind-blowing trends. Things like federated learning, fairness-aware architecture, and even the rise of AI fairness ratings for companies.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. Fairness ratings for companies. That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It might sound futuristic, but it's closer than you think.
Really?
Imagine a world where companies are actively rated on how fair their AI systems are. That could be a powerful incentive for businesses to really prioritize fairness.
Yeah, it's like giving consumers the power to vote with their wallets.
Exactly.
They can choose to support companies that are, doing the right thing.
Exactly. And all of these trends kind of suggest that we're moving toward a future where fairness is not just a nice to have,
Right.
it's an essential part of how we build and use AI.
It's a future I think we can all get behind. But before we jump too far ahead, let's go back to some of those other intriguing trends you mentioned, like federated learning, fairness-aware architecture. Those sound like they could be pretty complex topic.
They are.
Do you want to dive a little deeper?
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack these. Federated learning. That sounds kind of sci-fi. What's
Yeah.
that all about?
It is a really cool concept. Imagine different organizations wanting to team up on building an AI model, but they don't actually want to or can't share their raw data.
Okay.
Maybe it's hospitals working together to improve disease prediction, but they obviously can't just hand over all their patient records, right?
Yeah.
Federated learning lets them actually train this shared AI model while keeping that really sensitive data, locked up within their own systems.
So it's like getting the benefits of teamwork without having to compromise privacy.
Exactly.
That's pretty ingenious.
Yeah.
But how do you even make sure that shared AI model is fair if it's being trained on data from all these different places?
That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
And that's where things like fairness-aware architecture comes in.
Fairness-aware architecture.
This is about building those fairness considerations right into the actual structure of the AI system. So instead of trying to just tack on fairness at the end as an afterthought, you're actually baking it in from the very beginning.
So it's like building a house with, earthquake-resistant materials instead of just hoping it won't fall down when the shaking starts.
That's a great analogy.
But how does that actually work in practice?
There are a lot of different approaches being developed.
Okay.
But one example is using fairness constraints during that training process.
Fairness constraints.
Yeah, it's a little bit technical, but basically you're setting rules that the AI has to follow to make sure its decisions are actually fair.
Okay.
So imagine an AI system for hiring, as an example. You could set a fairness constraint that says the system can't favor, one gender over another, regardless of what patterns it might find in the data.
So it's like setting boundaries for the AI so it doesn't kind of stray into biased territory.
Exactly.
Okay. But this all sounds very proactive. What about when things go wrong? Does the report talk about how to deal with bias once it's already in an AI system?
It does. It does. It really emphasizes that building fair AI, it's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
You need to constantly be monitoring your systems for any sign of bias and be ready to take action, if you see a problem.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Oh.
You have to be constantly vigilant. But how do you even monitor for something as complex as bias?
Well, there are some pretty sophisticated tools emerging, Think about automated fairness dashboards that can track how an AI system is performing across different demographic groups.
Okay.
These dashboards can alert you to potential disparities before they become, huge problems.
So it's like an early warning system for bias.
Exactly, an early warning system.
But monitoring is only half the battle, right?
Right.
What happens when you actually detect that bias? What do you do?
The report stresses the importance of having really clear remediation processes.
Remediation processes.
Yeah. So that means knowing exactly what steps to take when bias is found. It might involve tweaking the algorithm, retraining the model with, more diverse data, or even taking the system offline until the issue is fixed.
So it's like having a fire drill.
Yeah.
You need to know what to do when the alarm bells go off.
Exactly.
But doesn't all this kind of raise the question of transparency?
It does.
Shouldn't companies be open about their efforts to address bias, both with their employees and, the public?
Transparency is absolutely crucial. The report argues that companies need to be, upfront about their fairness practices, sharing information about how they do things, their metrics, and even their shortcomings.
Right.
It's about building that trust and accountability.
It's like saying, we're not perfect,
Right.
but we are committed to doing the right thing, and here's how we're doing it.
Exactly.
Are there any examples of companies doing this well?
There are. There are some really encouraging examples out there. Some companies are now publishing really detailed transparency reports that outline their fairness metrics and steps they're taking to actually reduce bias. It's a way of showing they're committed and letting the public hold them accountable.
So it's like a scorecard for AI ethics.
Kind of, yeah.
That's a pretty powerful way to incentivize companies to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the users? of these AI systems,
Yeah.
how can they even be sure that they're being treated fairly?
Well, that's where things like explainable AI come in.
Explainable AI.
Yeah, imagine an AI system making a decision that, affects you, like denying you a loan.
Okay.
Explainable AI lets you understand why that decision was made. It's about making that AI's reasoning, transparent so you can actually challenge the decision if you think it's unfair.
So it's not just about getting a yes or no answer from the AI. It's about understanding the why behind the answer.
Exactly, the why.
That feels like a really huge step toward like empowering individuals.
It is.
But with all this talk about AI, bias, and fairness, it's easy to get kind of bogged down in the technical stuff, right?
Right.
Doesn't this ultimately boil down to a conversation about our values, like ethics?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the whole goal of this fair AI is to create a more just world, a more equitable society.
Right.
And that requires us to go beyond algorithms and data and think about the actual human impact of these technologies.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that behind every single data point, there's a person
There is.
with a story, with a life that's being affected by these decisions.
That's right.
So how do we even make sure that AI is used to uplift people, not hold them back?
That's a big question. And the report makes a really powerful call to action, not just for the companies building AI, but for everyone.
Yeah.
It's about staying informed,
Okay.
asking tough questions, and demanding that the AI we're all interacting with is designed with fairness in mind.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in, like shaping the future of AI.
We do.
And that future is just too important to be left to chance.
Too important. Well said. And the report highlights that, the journey towards this fair AI, it's not a sprint, it's more like a marathon, right?
Right.
It's going to take a sustained effort,
Yeah.
collaboration, and a willingness to learn and adapt constantly.
So as we kind of wrap up this section of our deep dive, what are like some key takeaways that you hope our listeners will kind of walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that addressing AI bias, it's not just a technical challenge, it's a human one.
Right.
It's about our values, it's about the choices that we make, and the kind of future that we want to build.
It's about recognizing that AI is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for, good or for bad. That's right. It's up to us to make sure that it's used to create a more just world, a more equitable world.
Okay, so it feels like we've covered a lot of ground here, from the real world cost of AI bias to those complex technical solutions, even those like ethical considerations. But I'm kind of wondering, what can our listener actually do with all this information?
Right.
It feels overwhelming, like where do you even start?
It's true. It can feel really daunting, but I think like the first step is really just staying informed.
Okay.
Keep learning about AI bias, the new research that comes out, those emerging regulations, things like that. You don't need to become a data scientist or anything,
Okay.
but just understanding those like basic things,
Yeah.
it can empower you to, at least spot those potential problems
Yeah.
and really advocate for change.
So knowledge is power. But where can people go to actually find, good information about this stuff? There's so much out there, it's really hard to know, like, what to trust. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of noise, but there are, some great resources out there, too. That Cognition.Info report that we've been talking about is a good place to start.
Okay.
And it links to some other organizations, too, like the Algorithmic Justice League. They're doing some really great work, advocating for more equitable AI systems.
So we can check out those resources to, learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
But what about when we're just out in the world, like actually interacting with AI? Are there any practical steps we can take to kind of identify and challenge that bias?
Absolutely. I mean, start by just being observant.
Okay.
When you come across, an AI system, whether it's a job application platform, a social media algorithm, whatever, just take a second to think critically about how it works. Ask yourself, who built this system and what assumptions did they maybe make when they built it? Could there be some unintended consequences?
Right.
And who might be affected by that?
So it's like becoming an AI detective, looking for those little like subtle clues that might like reveal bias.
Exactly.
What are like some red flags that people should be looking out for?
Well, one common one is a lack of diversity in the results.
Okay.
So if you're constantly seeing the same kinds of faces, voices, perspectives, that could be a sign of, bias in the data or the algorithm itself. Another red flag is just unexpected or unfair outcomes.
Okay.
For example, if you're constantly being shown lower priced products or job postings than Like your friends who have similar qualifications, that could be a sign of, algorithmic discrimination.
So it's about trusting your gut too, right?
Absolutely.
Like if something just feels unfair, if it feels discriminatory,
It probably is.
it probably is. But what can you actually do about it? It feels like one person's voice wouldn't make much of a difference against, like, a big tech company.
You'd be surprised at the power of that individual action. First, report your concerns to the company or the organization that's responsible for that AI system.
Okay.
A lot of companies actually have ways to report bias now,
Oh, good.
and they are often responsive to feedback.
So don't just grumble to yourself.
Yeah,
Actually, like, make your voice heard.
exactly.
What else can people do?
Share your experiences with others, talk to your friends, family, or colleagues.
Yeah.
Talk about AI bias, raise awareness on social media. The more people understand this issue, the more pressure we can put on these companies to make things fairer.
So it's about using your platform, whatever, how big or small it is, to kind of advocate for change.
Exactly.
And what about, like, supporting organizations that are actively, fighting this AI bias?
Yeah, that's a great way to make a difference, too. There are a lot of great organizations out there, like we mentioned the Algorithmic Justice League, Data for Black Lives, the Center for Democracy and Technology. They're doing incredible work to hold these companies accountable and push for more ethical AI. You can donate to them, volunteer your time, or even just, help to spread the word about the work they're doing.
So there's lots of, like, concrete actions we can take, even if we're not, tech experts or policymakers or anything.
You don't have to be.
And remember, you're not alone in this. There's a growing movement of people who are really passionate about making AI more fair, more equitable.
Absolutely. And that's what gives me, a lot of hope that collective action is what's going to drive change. And I believe that by working together, we can create a future where AI is a force for good, a tool that helps us build a more just world, a more equitable world for everyone.
It's inspiring to think about that positive potential of AI. It's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. If we get this right, AI can help us solve some of our biggest problems. It's
Yeah.
like climate change, disease prevention. It can help us create a more sustainable world, a healthier world, a more equitable world.
But to kind of unlock that potential,
Yeah.
we have to address this issue of bias head on.
We do.
We need to build AI systems that are not just intelligent, but also just equitable and, really aligned with our values.
Well said.
Hmm.
And as we've talked about in this deep dive, that's a journey, right?
Yeah.
It requires all of us to stay informed, to be engaged, and really committed to creating a better future, one algorithm at a time.
That's a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into AI bias. We hope this has given you, the knowledge, the inspiration to kind of join this movement for a more ethical and equitable AI future.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been great.